Hip Hop Humboldt.
Hey, welcome to Hip Hop Humboldt Radio. This is also going to be an episode of the Hip Hop Humboldt Podcast. And with me in the studio for Hip Hop Humboldt Radio today, we have local activists doing really good work in Humboldt County for multiple years at this point. And I want to give a big shout out to Rick Toledo. How you doing, Rick?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, David. It's great to be here. I really appreciate everything you do as well for this community and helping to highlight activism and the important stuff that's going on here. So thank you.
Absolutely. No, it's my pleasure, and I'm really pleased to have you in the studio to do this. It's been, I feel like it's been a long time coming because I've seen you do a lot of good work in the community, and there needs to be more, just basically opportunity for local activists to be able to come to, let's say, a radio show and talk about activist things that are happening, in general. Like I feel like there's room for it in Humboldt County, and so I'm, like I said, stoked to be able to take this time for us to come in here and record this right now. And like I said to the people, so right now you may be listening on 94.7 FM here in Arcata and Eureka. You could be tuning in via humboldthotair.org, and this is also going to be available on demand on the Hip Hop Humboldt Podcast after this broadcast is done. So you guys are going to be able to tune in and hear what Rick has to say permanently moving forward, and you'll be able to check that out on HipHopHumboldt.com. And so, yeah, Rick, like I said, I've had my eye on what you've been doing around here. It's nothing but good work. And I feel like I'm going to try to slide over here, too, because I don't want to be, too far away from you. You know what I mean? So you have been, I want to say, and so, of course, anything that I say, correct me if I'm wrong, but you have been a leader leading a major part of the positive work that Students for a Democratic Society Humboldt has been doing. And so I wanted to talk about that during the broadcast. I want to talk about, as much as you're willing, of course, I wanted to talk about what happened last year with the Occupy Cal Poly movement. And I'd like to speak on things that you have done in the community since, whether it's with SDS on campus or things that you've been doing off campus. You have been involved, from what I understand, you have been working closely with Humboldt for Palestine over the last couple years. And so I want to talk about, as much as we can of what you're willing to give to the people to let them know what's happening. I think a lot of the time that's what happens is there's people, a lot of people, most people, I don't want to say all people because it's not all people, but most people see that we need a change. And most people want to make that change. They just don't know how to go about it. They don't know how to find different groups that are moving and mobilizing out there. And so sometimes there just needs to be, that's why I was saying there needs to be more exposure on a radio level, on these media outlet levels, to be able to have something where people can say, okay, so this is what's going on. This is how I get involved. I want to bet that if you're on campus, that you know about Students for a Democratic Society Humboldt, right? I think if you're on campus, you know about it. But for the people that aren't, or maybe they're no longer, students, they're probably looking for some outlets to be able to engage the community, to be able to get some good work done. And I want to give a quick shout out to the wonderful organizers, mutual friends of ours with, again, Humboldt for Palestine and the work that they've done. I want to say that the majority of the people in this community, unless you're under a rock, you know what I mean, you've seen the work that Humboldt H4P has done. It's been beautiful work, and big shout out to them. And then, past that, most recently, I've seen, the Humboldt Anti-War Committee out there, and even in a very recent, this week, got, a bit of press for the work that was done. The group went to, and I say the group, and I don't want to. Anybody who knows me, and anybody who has kept their eye on it knows that I am also a part of it. So I don't want to just speak in the third person. Like, I'm a part of the Humboldt Anti-War Committee as well. And so people have seen that this week, whether there was a Times Standard article, there was a Lost Coast Outpost article that was kind of trash. There was, I'll say that straight up. You know what I mean? And then there was a Kim Kent Red-Headed Black Belt article that I think was probably the most factual. Yeah. And so towards the end of things, I want to get into, what's going on with the Humboldt Anti-War Committee and anything else, any other organizations, whether it's, anything you want to talk about. I don't want to just put everything out there. You know what I mean? If there's, if you don't want to get into the FRSO, we don't have to, or we can. This platform for these 2 hours is open for us to talk about everything that you're willing to speak on in terms of local activism, what you've done and what's happening. So
right on. Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm willing to speak about anything, really. So that's cool with me. I guess we could start talking about SDS a little bit, I think because I think it's important for people in the community, too, to know what's going on with SDS. Even if you're not a student, a lot of the work that we do branches out much farther than just what's happening on campus, because we're doing stuff against wars, and imperialism and these big issues that affect everybody. And I think it's important. I also think it's important that there is like a unified movement from the community to the campus, wherever we're at. I think it's crucial. If we look back to like the Vietnam War, that was really important. There was a lot of solidarity going on between the movements on campus, movements in the community, more radical movements. All of it was tied together, and it culminated in some really powerful actions, and it culminated in a lot of pressure on the people in power, which helped to alleviate some of the suffering for people in Vietnam who were fighting back against imperialism. And I think we saw something similar with Palestine just recently. When I came to Cal Poly Humboldt, there was a protest that happened. I think it was within like my first month or so there, and it was about housing issues on campus. And this was just like a grassroots student-led thing. Like, there was no formal organization, but these students just came together and were like, we're not okay with you pushing us out to motels, not having enough housing, saying that you're going to bring all these people in, but you have nowhere to put them. Like, we're not cool with that. Obviously, and I was living in the dorms at the time because I just moved here from LA area. So I didn't know, I didn't have the ability as someone who's, I'm not a wealthy guy, to come all the way out here and check out places and go through all that hassle. So it was a good way to just get in easily to start school out here. So those problems affected me directly as well. And obviously I cared about them affecting others and new people coming. So I went to that and I spoke there. They had like an open mic, and it was at that protest that I realized, there were a lot of problems on campus that needed to be dealt with, and there really wasn't a formal organization to do that. The group around that, they ended up forming like a temporary organization around that particular issue called HESHA, and I joined up with them, and they integrated into SDS, and we worked together for a while, and we founded SDS together. Unfortunately, a lot of them, once we got what they needed for housing, they were kind of done at that point. And we see it happen a lot, unfortunately, where sometimes you got people who come into this work to get what they need, and then when they got it, they're gone. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that, I would like to criticize. I think that people should stay in this work and keep struggling. It doesn't matter if we got what we need. If other people don't have what they need, we need to struggle for them as well, because we're all in this together. And so long as some people can be oppressed, anyone can be oppressed, right? So that was a big thing, but a lot of those people stayed too. There was a good core of them who stayed and helped build SDS, and soon enough, Palestine stuff started to escalate. It's been an issue for a real long time. They've been living in apartheid. It's been genocide. I've known since I was like 18 years old when I first started to research it, and I was looking into firsthand accounts of like families who had lived in this. They had deep roots in this land, and they were being torn off their properties and forced into prostitution and slavery and just horrible things. And that had been going on, but this recent escalation really got a lot of attention on it. And, it really brought a lot of people out. And we jumped on that and started advocating for that right away on campus and fighting for Palestine. SDS nationally did. We're a national organization. We're just one chapter of many others. And we all fought together. And that's kind of around that same time, Humboldt for Palestine showed up on the scene, and they just formed up as like a small group. It was just, I think it was like, I don't want to use names because I'm not in a place to do that, but, it was one particular organizer who's Palestinian and a Jewish friend, and they had put out a call for like a protest, and it blew up. And a lot of people showed up, obviously, because people care about this. We don't want our tax dollars being used to harm people abroad.
Right.
Especially indigenous peoples, on their land. Like, we don't want that. So lots of people turned out, and it grew quickly. And SDS became a tight partner of Humboldt for Palestine from the beginning. And, we organized together quite a bit, and I became a member of Humboldt for Palestine too for, quite some time till just about the end of that. And I think, I think that energy, it really built to a boiling point because, and not just on our campus, but all over, right? We saw the national encampment movement.
Mm-hmm.
It was huge.
It was beautiful to see.
Yeah. And it was just that we weren't getting what we needed. Palestinians are still being just bombarded, their homes destroyed, and people wanted to do more. We weren't, all we were getting was like empty words from the administrations on campus. All of these administrations have some ties to Israel. Even on our campus, they love to talk about how, it's a small percentage and yada yada. Well, hey, if it's so small, then why don't you divest from it?
Right. It should be that much easier to just divest those funds.
Exactly. And they haven't. And that's getting into another thing we're doing right now. But I have a meeting with them, SDS does, on the 15th. And we have brought forward what we call an ethical investment declaration that we want them to adopt as permanent policy for the school. And what it does is it looks at the things that are immediately within the power of the university administration to divest from that have ties not only to Israel, but to weapons manufacturing that goes towards the U.S. military-industrial complex, to anything associated with the U.S. military-industrial complex, and even to like border checkpoint technology that's being used on the border here to oppress, people coming in, and also in Palestine to oppress Palestinians on their land, through Israeli apartheid checkpoints. So it targets all of that, and it says in order for them to start the process, they need to divest from all of those things. And there's a bigger question of like the Cal Poly Corporation investments and like the CSU investments. Mm-hmm. Those are bigger struggles though. For now, we're focusing on this is what y'all can do. Because they love to say, we can't do this, we can't do that, but we know they can do this. So let's make them do this.
That's right.
And, but anyway, that wasn't happening anywhere. Nobody was divesting. And it took that amount of pressure all over the country. People started to set up tents. And what's crazy is the encampment movement, it started with students just setting up tents and saying, well, we're not going to leave this public space until you do something about this because it's in your power to do so. Mm-hmm. And it was met with excessive violence.
Right.
Just police brutality all over the country, just setting up tents. How big of a threat is a tent? A student in a tent. They were terrified of that.
Mm-hmm. They were. And I think, a big part of that is they saw, like you were talking about earlier in the broadcast, they saw the movement during the Vietnam War and how much students made a difference in pressuring, like you just said, in pressuring the powers that be to slowly in that war in Vietnam and in the killing in Vietnam, and they didn't want that to happen again. And it was again, I say it's beautiful because it's all very fresh in my mind because only 2 years ago, but just how it spread like wildfire. How there was just like it started to be like one day there was like 1 to 2 different encampments that got set up. Then within like about a week to 2 weeks time, there was encampments coast to coast, dozens of colleges. And that really, that's what really does scare them is people being on the same page, especially students, because this is the next generation of people that are funding, these colleges. People are paying tuition to these colleges. You can really put like a real wrench in their gears to have an entire generation of people aware and mobilizing for a specific cause like this. And like you said, it was met with excessive violence. There was all, I've from Columbia all the way to all kinds of other, non-Ivy League schools as well, of course. Like, they just didn't want to do what they needed to do, which is, like you said, just that divestment, those funds. And then people started to get aware of how much funds on these colleges, like that their funds are, invested in these military industrial complex, companies and corporations, right? Mm-hmm. And it's a real eye opener, and there's no going back. That those eyes are now open. People now see like, oh shoot, this is not just people. I hear that all the time. That's one of the common, even locally things that people say. Oh well, Eureka should be focusing on Eureka. Well, as soon as Eureka's dollars are invested in corporations that are taking action and doing things outside of Eureka, it is no longer a just in Eureka, just focus on Eureka problem, And so, yeah, I just remember it all. And then I was with what happened here locally, it was just so inspiring for me because I've been an activist around here for years, like we've talked about before, and to see the students come together and actually, do something that was more than just, like it, at the point when it came to, there's protesting, there's mobilizing. And we've kind of seen, especially in the last, since the Obama era, since prior to even that, but people have been protesting and like they haven't been listened to, like they're not listening to us. And so there has to be a little bit more teeth in what's being done. Like you can go out and protest, and if you just go out and protest one day with no demands, that's completely basically performative. Yeah. And it's not going to achieve anything in reality. And so there has to be some more teeth, and that's what the students started to do. And honestly, I may be wrong about this, but the students here on campus at Cal Poly taking a building was one of the first instances of that in the whole country.
Yep. No, it was. And it was extremely inspirational because it was just, a Cal State. Like it wasn't all these other campuses that were doing big things. Like a lot of them at the start were like ones with very wealthy people, people who were able to do these things without as severe risk. And I don't want to take away from what they did. What they did is just as important. But a lot of them had a little more backing, something to fall back on. Whereas at a state college, a lot of people are coming from very poor families, like they don't have a big safety net to fall back on. And the amount of risk that was taken by these students to fight for people in Palestine. And when you talk to the students who were the most involved in this, they would say every time they have it worse in Palestine, so it does not matter. And that was extremely inspirational. And I'll tell you, all across my organization, SDS, nationally, people were inspired by the Humboldt students. They were moved by the Humboldt students. There were multiple attempts at occupying other administration buildings because of what happened here. And they did hold it down for a bit in quite a few of them before they were ultimately, taken apart. But it was because they were so inspired by what happened here. And people from Palestine literally sent in like images thanking the students in Cal Poly Humboldt. It reached the people of Palestine, which I think it was extremely moving. I think that was for everyone who was a part of it in any way, that was extremely important to all of us. It's something we'll never forget. And it's interesting how it happened here too, because, you know, there have been sit-ins before in Cal Poly Humboldt, like things like the Food Sovereignty Lab were won in part by sit-ins, and especially by like indigenous students and stuff. Like there's a history of that here. Like, and so when students were planning to do a sit-in, you know, the vast majority of them were not anticipating the response that they got, actually. They didn't go into it thinking that it was going to be that excessive from the start. You know, I had an idea that it might, and I did put out a warning to some of them because I had just had multiple police show up when I was trying to disrupt Tom Jackson's donor event to get him to pay attention, because, you know, he was hiding from us. When we tried to intercept him to ask him questions about the school falling apart and him profiteering off of it, he ran away. So at a certain point, you got to go find him. And they came down pretty hard on me for that, and also on Mary, who was a co-organizer in that protest with me. And so I was kind of like on high alert already, and I kind of put out a call to some people like, hey, I think something might go down. And I was asked, I have legal observer training as well. And so when things started to happen, when the cops started to show up, I got messages like, hey, get here now. We need a legal observer right out in the front. So I showed up right there for that. And we had multiple SDSers in there, along with just like all kinds of students, different political ideologies. Some of them, you know, just average students who wanted to do something about it. You know, some of them came from anarchist backgrounds or socialist backgrounds or whatever, but they were all there together to take a stand for Palestine. It didn't matter. You know, you had all kinds in there. And when I got there, the cops were starting to group up around the building already. So I started getting badge numbers and kind of intercepting them and questioning them. And then more people started to show up and kind of gather in the front. And we had already put out the call. Humboldt for Palestine was calling for, you know, support to see, like, from their community, like, can we get people over here? And then we, obviously, SDS put out a call. There was all kinds of, like, signal chats going off where we were calling for the community. And sure enough, you know, people from the community, all kinds of students, just tons of people showed up and kind of acted as a buffer and also as witnesses to stop them from doing anything too extreme, because it was quite obvious that they were there to drag students out. Mm-hmm. And for a while, we were able to deter them. But after a bit, they started to try to violently get into the building. They started to push back protesters aggressively, and even journalists, like student journalists that were out in the front, were pushed back by the police brutally, knocked over. And then at that point, when they started trying to get into the building, they literally cracked one student's head open. They grabbed another and threw them hard on the concrete and dragged them away. It got very aggressive where we were pushing back against them. It heated up a lot. And there was one moment that I have video of where a bunch of cops tried to intimidate us by marching up to the building with what looked like shotguns in a line, and it didn't stop us. So we stayed, we kept going, and eventually they got called off and they all just left. And it was a huge victory. People were cheering, hugging.
Heck yeah.
People, you know, the students inside were just like tearing up, you know. And it was a really powerful moment. We had withstood the police brutality and the violence, but at the same time, you know, it's horrible what those cops did to some of those students. Unforgivable. And they, you know, the administration still has not fully answered for that. I believe that there needs to be some lawsuits on behalf of those students who were harmed. I think they have gotten off way too easy and tried to bury it way too easily, because this is serious stuff, you know?
Yeah. Can't be brutalizing students at their own school.
No, especially students like some of these students, I know them, you know what I mean? I've known them for a long time, and they told me we were going to go in there. We thought we were going to do homework while we did this sit-in. We thought we were going to read and talk together, and it turned into a totally different thing the moment that the police started to attack us. Mm-hmm. But they were extremely brave. They didn't let the cops stop them. They stood with Palestine. They remembered what Palestinians were going through. I think we all did. And we said, no, we're not going anywhere.
Yeah, it was one of the things it reminded me of is some of the autonomous zones that people in different spots in the country, but definitely in Portland and Seattle that were set up during the Floyd insurrection, and so it was like a kind of this iteration, and it was happening for Palestine. And in my eyes, I'm looking at it and I'm like, between what's happening here in Humboldt and across the country, I was like, I was just so proud because I'm just like, these folks actually now finally like globalized the intifada. You know what I mean? Like, and that was something that Palestinian people have been calling for so long. And there's been instances, there was a little bit of, things that happened back in the 80s and the 90s. But like this was, literally worldwide. Of course, there's going to be pockets where there wasn't anything. But, basically the United States, Europe, and other countries too, in Asia, like, I mean, there was students just, looking at what was happening and like this is the time to do what's right. And because I mean it's just been so flagrantly disgusting how brutal this and I hate to use these terms, but I'm just reflecting on these terms that like the Israelis use, how they quote unquote mow the lawn. That's how they see it, right? This instance of that just has and still has not stopped. And so it was good for I just think in terms of I was proud to see, especially here in our backyard. I went to this school and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so proud of these students. Having lived in Humboldt County for about 21, 22 years now, to me this was one of the coolest. Literally, I mean, I'm gonna say it like that. It was one of the coolest, most inspiring things that I've seen happen in Humboldt County in my 22 years of being here, and the bravery involved. I think that there's, the things, some of the things that should be kept in mind is, us living in this bit of a mass shooter, society. Students have been, going through drills in school for mass shooters and everything like that for years and years. And we're able to use some of that training to literally, the way I see it, like battle back the cops when the cops tried to go into Siemens Hall and everything, and so it was just the most beautiful thing, one of the most beautiful things that I've seen, and for it to be happening globally and then what was happening here, I'm just like, oh my gosh. And then, you know what I mean? And I'm not trying to, definitely not trivializing what, I'm just trying to point at certain specific things that happened, but, like something that people will never forget. And you have to have these kind of things to help people remember it. But like the water bottle, how the person was able to, bonk the police officer on the head, you know what I mean? Like, it's just like a symbol. There's that symbolism that people will never forget because Cal Poly was one of the first places to take a building in the name of supporting the Palestinian people in their fight against this Holocaust that is literally continuing to happen against them. And so, that's the thing, is that Humboldt County has been known to be a more left-leaning county. It's this duality because we are in white rural America, white rural California, but the students that come here are very positive minded when it comes to thinking forward, when it comes to knowing what's right from wrong, and actually being willing to stand up for it. And so big time shout out to everybody that was involved. It's horrible to hear that, and we saw that things progressed on from there with the police. The once the Siemens Hall, it got, basically everybody kind of, left Siemens Hall and everything like that. There was still people on campus that were consistently like, hey, we're going to consistently, basically every day, we're going to flood the quad. We're going to come out and make things happen and still make our voices be heard. And then we saw subsequently, right, troopers, law enforcement from up and down the state come in to Cal Poly Humboldt to try to disassemble the movement. we just recently talked about that in the anti-war committee, right? There was literally, it was the Intercept that dropped this article in the last, I think, 2 weeks even, where they showed that it was emergency funds that were used. California, I think it was state emergency funds to literally to pull police up here to break up what was happening.
I couldn't believe it when I saw a Channel Islands police truck. I'm like, I know where Channel Islands is. That's far, I lived like 10 hours away. That's a little farther than me. We're talking like 11 hours or something from here. And they pulled from Channel Islands, from Cal States all over the state. And they used natural disaster relief funds. Tom Jackson pushed it through. He thought it was so important to repress the students here and to shut it down. And the CSU board were all too happy to comply because it was hurting their business as usual. It was hurting the things they cared about. The governor had to be in on it. There's no way something that big doesn't move without his say-so. And you know what? He's one of the people who pushed through the repressive time, place, and manner policies that came in the aftermath. So they were all in on it, and they thought it was so important to use natural disaster relief funds to repress the students here in Humboldt.
It's crazy.
Absolutely crazy, yeah. And I remember seeing those trucks from all over, and I was just like, what is happening? I have never seen that. I've been an activist for a long time, organizer for less time than that, but still for quite some time. And I've never seen that. It was something else. And to hear that that's how it happened just in the last couple of weeks, I mean,
right. Yeah. I didn't have any idea that it was emergency funds, or disaster relief funds that were used to do that. And it's crazy because, at that moment in time, that night, I remember this all, pretty darn well. I'm looking from afar, not from too afar. I'm, just living in Eureka, and I'm, I got my kids, so I got to, stay home and everything like that. But I was watching multiple live streams and communicating with people that were doing the same to try to provide some level of logistics, because I know that there were people that were watching the live feeds, because there was the Lumberjack, I think it was El Lenador, there was multiple other outlets that had live streams going on, to where there was some level of people being able to disseminate information about, okay, let's keep an eye for when these cops come through. And even before that, I don't even want to ignore or definitely not erase some of the beautiful work that was done by local activists and students there were there was community, there was mutual aid happening right then and there, and and I'm so blessed to have seen that type of mentality again, kind of the last time that kind of happened, at least on a big level, was with the Floyd insurrection, and when people were protesting, and there were the people, whether you're anarchist or just activist-minded, that know that, okay, so you have to bring mutual aid together. There was a lot of mutual aid happening up in PDX, up in Portland, when there was the movement, for Floyd happening up there. You have to be able to sustain people to be able to do what they need to do on the front lines, and so that was happening here on campus. There were beautiful people, like I know specifically the Do Nothing Society. Those folks helped pull in mutual aid, and and just have all of that. So that way, that it's the entire front of like what you need to have happening to sustain people. Because a lot of some of the people. Some of our biggest comrades in this struggle are homeless people. They are the people that are considered, quote unquote, I say quote unquote because they're not losers, but in capitalism, there's winners, quote unquote, and losers, quote unquote. And so these are the folks that are suffering the most under capitalism right now in terms of their material conditions, that are like our most important comrades to pull out, because they're the people that deserve better material conditions. And so that's what, a part of it is, creating mutual aid for those folks, and so all that was happening in those days leading up to when the cops came in from all up and down the state, and and I'm so proud of some of our mutual friends. Again, I think you're smart and I'm not going to either. I'm not going to mention names of people, but some of our specific friends that stayed till the end and got arrested, including faculty on campus, students on campus, and people from off campus that stayed to the end that night. And I remember, they sat in a circle like, we're not leaving. Like, you're going to have to, you know what I mean? And that's the smart way, is because what would have been the worst situation for the system and for law enforcement and for the state and for CSU and anybody else that's on their side would have been to have imagery of people getting brutalized, because that's going to pull in more people to the cause, right? And so they're literally taking it to the very end. Like, if you're really gonna, because like you said earlier, when that day in Siemens Hall, when the cops came in, eventually they backed down. Like, they were like, oh, there's either too many people here, whatever their reasons were. We don't want it. We already were. They were, like you said, they were brutalizing students. They don't want imagery out there. And there were people, to my understanding, with cameras, journalists, like I was saying, that were there that night when the cops from all over the state came in. And, so they don't want imagery out there like that of people getting brutalized. And so shout out to those people that took it to the very end to say, no, we're standing up for Palestine. And if you guys want to stop us, you're going to have to physically remove us, Yeah. And I think that one of the bad things that I've seen since Floyd and especially now in the recent year with the Trump administration trying to stop protests that happened in June, starting in June, anti-ICE protests and things, these consequences, they're like really draconian consequences. They're like, they're trying to give people, like just really long sentences, really high bail to drain bail funds across the country that were supporting students and just people that were standing up for Palestine across the country. They're doing their tactics on their side to try to, slow the movement and cut off the movement as much as they can. So shout out to the people that took it all the way to the end at Cal Poly, and anybody that was involved. It was super important for the movement in general, and I think some people may not get that. There's going to be the opposite mentality that this is all just nonsense and this and that, and they're going to minimize and diminish. But I think potentially some of those people know deep down how important Cal Poly was and the efforts and the students that did this work at Cal Poly from start to finish,
Yeah, absolutely. As you said, it was very much an autonomous zone. It was very much. And there was like free food that was set up by some of the organizers there. There was, we had like signal chats for like what the people in the building needed. So they'd be like, we need this, this, and this. And we'd go around on the outside and get it and bring it to them. So there was like all kinds of network stuff. There was like a health tent there. And unfortunately, the police stole a lot of the medical supplies at the end. So there was a struggle to try to get those back. We reported that in the media. But, there was a ton of support for the people there, because you're right. Because if you're going to do something for multiple days in a row and withstand the police aggression, you got to have those support systems. And you also have to have like some kind of security protocol. You got to be able to defend yourselves and take care of your people. And really, the community showed up in full support. Like, people were doing whatever they could coming out of the woodwork to make sure that everyone had what they needed. And it was a beautiful moment. It really showed what we can accomplish together. When we work together outside of this broken system, we really can build something better. People saw a glimpse of that, I think, on a smaller scale on our campus. And I do think that it was one of the like really important parts of that encampment movement. It inspired so much, and every person who was a part of it made a huge difference. And, on the last night when people were getting arrested, you talked about the people who stayed there. I was up that entire night. I didn't sleep because it was tough because there was a lot of like communication that wasn't quite getting through because there was just so many people. There's so many different groups and so many people. So like SDS had been asked by some of a good number of students there to organize a bail fund and a support fund. So I became the one who was managing that. So at that point, once I started the fundraising, it was going to like me. So I had to make sure I didn't get arrested because if I were to get arrested, then who's going to bail people out? We didn't know at the time there was actually a secondary bail fund too, the ARC bail fund.
Right.
And we actually met them while we were bailing people out, and they needed help finding like points of contact to be like co-signers. So we helped them do that. We all worked together. It was kind of cool. But like a lot of people got arrested, and I know a lot of them personally because I worked with them after that. And a lot of them, they worked at the school. They had housing through the school. Like these were not students who were well off or who, the right wingers like to say, oh, they got paid by so and so, whatever. No, they were risking, being houseless. They were risking losing their jobs. I know one person in particular who loved their job at the school. They were taking on like a teaching role. It's one of our people who was in SDS, and they were beside themselves with the way that they were treated in the aftermath for standing up for people literally being genocided, to lose the position that they loved, and to just be ostracized and to not be able to pay their bills or rent. It was the school just laid the hammer down and tried to put some pretty hefty charges against the majority of them. Mm-hmm. So at that point, I didn't sleep that night. I tried to bail them out right away, but the way the jail works here is different than how it works in LA. I couldn't until a certain time, so I had to just hang out outside the jail. And by the time I could, something interesting is that the jail made it so we couldn't view any of the names or arrests or anything. They claimed the system was down. How convenient.
Right. How
convenient that the system was suddenly down the day that they needed to get bailed out, right? And because the way that the occupation was handled, a lot of people did not give their real names or share their real names. There were aliases all around, and there was no central organizing force. I think I've been very clear with that in most of my interviews that I've had about it, where it's no, SDS didn't organize this, we're a part of it, but this was decentralized thing. This was there was no central organizing force. So we had to figure out who was who to do the defense work and to get people out of jail. And that was a whole thing because they made it very difficult for us to do that. And I would say it was purposeful. I believe that that's what it was because that's the only time that it happened. Mm-hmm. How convenient for them. So anyway, luckily we were able to do the legwork and we were able to get people out. And then when the ARC Fund showed up, they had a good list of names too. So we collaborated, and they set a very high bail. We thought we were just going to bail them outright. I think it was $10,000 a person or something like that. And we could, through bail bonds, you can get it down to 1%, but you need co-signers and stuff. And that's what ARC didn't count on either. They were like, why the hell? Oh, sorry. Why the heck is it $10,000 bail? That's crazy, And so they weren't ready for it. So that's why they didn't have co-signers ready, because they thought the same thing we did. We're just going to bail them outright, just post the bail. But because it was so high, we had to go through a bail place, the local bail place. And that way we could pay 10% up front to get people out. Mm-hmm. So it was a whole day event getting people out. But eventually we did. We got everyone out of there, and then we started the defense work. And it was, talking to people. Luckily, I'm glad that ARC was there, because we would have used our whole bail fund. But since we didn't, it gave us extra money to support people. And that was really, I think, the most important role that SDS played in the aftermath, was supporting all of these people who lost their jobs, who couldn't pay rent, who lost their housing. And we were just come to us. We'll take care of you, you know, show us what's going on. As long as you can show us what happened, we'll give you the money. And that's what we did. And we did it for a lot of people. And because of us, people were able to keep their heads, you know, over water. And it didn't make it that much easier. You know, they still struggled a lot, but at least we were able to make sure that they had their bills paid, that they had food, that they had their roof over their head. And that was a big part of it. And in the end, we were even able to donate $20,000 to a Palestinian family that desperately needed the money. So we were able to support them, like in Palestine, and it helped them significantly. So that was a really important moment too, you know, because we want, of course, we got to take care of our people who are on the front lines here fighting, but also the people in Palestine are feeling it 100 times worse, 1,000 times worse. So to be able to give them some relief was really important. I only wish we could have done more. You know what I'm saying? I only wish we could have helped them even more than we did. But I'm glad we got to do something. And none of that money fundraised, none of anything that happened, none of that attention would have been possible without the brave students who took a stand. And even now, so far in the aftermath of that, SDS would not have the kind of leveraging power that we've gained on campus. We wouldn't be able to go to this meeting on the 15th if it weren't for brave students who fought, who made them afraid, who put the pressure on. Because people in power, they don't give you anything for free. You have to take it. You have to fight for it. And that's exactly what they did. And even now, you know, recently we did our October 7th event this year, and we dealt with repression from the campus. We dealt with discrimination because it was a Palestine event and they wanted to protect the Zionists. And we weren't even going to mess with this Zionist group. They were way in a different area, but because they were there, they discriminated against the pro-Palestine movement, the much bigger movement that's actually standing for something. That's who they targeted, because we threaten the people in power, because we threaten the imperialism that they get rich off of, the resource extraction, and the harm that they cause.
That's right.
So, you know, they targeted us, and even in that, did we take it? No, we fought back. You know, I went public because the truth of the matter is, whether it be with the occupation of Siemens Hall, whether it be with what happened to me recently, or any other case of people fighting back, when they attack, we got to go on the offensive twice as hard.
That's right.
And we got to have faith that the people will back us, that the people will stand up and fight back, especially when it comes to a cause as important as Palestine, you know, when it comes to people who are just dealing with the worst conditions possible for so long on our tax dollars from these people in power. Like, we have to push harder, because the thing is, they want us to hide. They want us to go on the defensive. They want us to be afraid. But when we push back and when we challenge them and when we have the support of the public and put the pressure on, they get scared. They don't want it.
Yep,
they
sure
understand
don't.
that.
Yep. And they're going to try, like you said, they're going to fight their hardest to pull it all down and try to, you know, do what they can to break it up. And and I really think that it's super important that SDS, you know, and the students in SDS did that work to be able to, like you said, have this clout now to be able to continue the fight, because Cal Poly still has not divested. You know, I think it's, I mean, it may be a handful of universities across the country that have, but what people got to keep in mind is, just like the fire that spread when tents went up and encampments went up, it can be that fast with colleges and universities across the country divesting once. This is now what everybody's pushing for. People have not stopped. They're not standing down. This is still free Palestine, divest all these funds locally, because, I mean, we all know that the United States is one of the primary backers of this genocide and has been for the longest time. And so, yeah, you know, like we have to keep in mind that this has not stopped. The genocide has not stopped. It's only gotten worse. And there's hundreds of thousands of people that they have killed in the last just 2 years literally hundreds of thousands. And so that, and I feel like now that, Israel has killed a ridiculous amount of journalists in Palestine, that people aren't seeing things like they have been over the last 2 years. So and with our, that we've all been kind of, not every single person, but, we've all had these cell phones and this, attention economy in our hand where, if it's not in your feed and you're not seeing it, then it's not an issue. Yeah. It's still happening. And people are still fighting across this country. People are still fighting in the United Kingdom, one of the other primary backers of this genocide. The UK might not be giving as much literal raw ammunition and firepower to it, but they are giving jets included, and they're giving a lot of surveillance is what the UK is doing. They literally have some of their planes launch on a daily basis from Cyprus to surveil movements and people and what's happening in Gaza. And Germany is the other one. Those are the three. Like that's like the I talk like I talk, and I'm going to say what I'm going to say. Basically that is like the axis of evil. The United States, the United Kingdom, Germany, and Israel is the modern day axis of evil, perpetuating this genocide to this day. And so, the activists we've seen, to branch over real quick, not to spend a whole lot of time branching out overseas, but the people over in the UK, Palestine Action has been a very important group that has done great work to literally take it to these weapons manufacturers, to their factories, and literally do what they can to stop operations, to stop the flow of weapons, And so, I feel like in this country, if people had more mass political consciousness around the issue, I think there's just a lot of people that are, whether it's apathetic or just, it's the United States of America. We're very propagandized, citizenry. And so, and then the laws are set up, like we were talking about, the laws are set up to be very draconian, to where if you're doing something like the people in the UK are doing, the Palestine Action people are doing, like you're going to get 10 years, type of thing in this country, right? They've got the law set up to be very like, you don't want to do this unless you want to say goodbye to your family for 10 years kind of thing, right? And so, but with that all being said, shout out to Palestine Action. Shout out to the people that are continuing to fight. Shout out to SDS on the local and national level, because I know that the work that you guys are doing here on the local levels actually is still happening on the national level with the students trying to get divestment on campuses. And once that starts to happen, see, that's what happened with, South Africa, when the people pushed hard enough, and I'm not giving a whole, the artists, musicians did make a big push. There was a lot of people that made a push to end apartheid in South Africa. And once, Berkeley was one of the first campuses to say, all right, we're going to divest from corporations that are doing business or, involved in South Africa and harmful things in South Africa. Then it was, again, like that was like the fire that went across. And then, eventually there was enough money that was being pulled out of supporting apartheid to where that wall, came down in a sense, right? And so that is what people are still now pushing for, is that level of divestment to get our tax dollars out of this. Like you would even think that all these, crazy Republicans and, conservatives that, say that, there's too much pork barrel spending, they're even following, because Trump ran on being an anti-war, kind of president, you know what I mean? Even though that's not the reality of it, but, that's their mentality, is we don't want to, spend money on this and, spend money on the United States, blah, 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 like is what they try to say, but they seem to be okay with billions of dollars consistently getting just literally forked over, to the flow of it actually being, that money goes to the military industrial complex, who then ships the weapons over to Israel to use against the Palestinian people, right?
Yeah.
Something else that you talked about earlier too, just something, because I try to educate people as much as I can, and especially in a setting like this when we're talking about these concepts, it's been interesting, not even interesting, it's disgusting to see how Gaza is used as like a testing ground for technology, and it's been that way for years. They test these weapons and technology on the people of Gaza first. And then it comes back here, the imperial boomerang. Cops have been trained by Israel and the IDF for, at this point now, decades, especially some of these East Coast departments, Atlanta, Boston, some of these places. They've literally been trained by the IDF, by some of these people that have literally killed Palestinian people. And so that it comes back over here. And so we cannot have that. We cannot continue to see that. Quick shout out to the people that have been against cop cities across the country. That's an important movement out there.
Stop Cop City, yeah.
Right. Atlanta, rest in peace, Tortuguita. You know what I mean? Like, there have been people that have given their lives to to make awareness of this situation. It still doesn't get enough awareness and people involved with trying to stop it, because it is, they're literally bringing that same violence home to us.
Yeah. It's it's literally, they are urban training grounds for police, because they want to be able to violently quell uprisings. And I think that it speaks to a deeper issue with the system, right? It's that they're not willing to give us any more handouts. They're not willing to bend an inch. The people in power don't want to give us anything. They don't want to give any reforms. So once we start to become unhappy with the way we're being oppressed to the point where we're going to organize and do something about it, they want to be prepared to put us down. And I think that's exactly what it is. When you see these increased militarized police budgets, these cop cities to train them, they want to make sure that they can do what they do to people abroad, like in Palestine, and what they want to do to Venezuela right now, what they do to so many places, they want to be able to do to us here. And I think, we probably saw there's been a couple times we may have gotten close to an actual system change event. And one of the times was during the Great Depression. And you literally had militant unions that were organized. You had mass organizations that were militant, just all of these groups were organized in strong coalition, and they had strong central organization as well, to the point where they were a major threat to the people in power. And it was because so many people at home had been suffering and had enough. They didn't want to do it anymore. They were ready to do away with capitalism. And the response to that from FDR was to give them these reforms to quell the uprising. And it didn't help everyone all that much, It didn't help indigenous peoples on the res. It didn't help a lot of black people all that much. Didn't help a lot of brown people all that much. But it helped enough people enough to where that mass militant movement started to quell. And they learned from that, I'm a proud socialist. And so I would say that we are in a constant class war with the people in power, and it's our interest versus their interests, right? And it's in their interest to continue exploiting us. It's not in their interest to give us reforms. Every single thing that we have ever gained from them was gained through struggle. They never have handed us anything for free. And they didn't want us to keep those reforms either. They stripped them all away. And now we're left in this place where we're probably even worse off than we were in the Great Depression. And they love it that way. So what's the approach? They know that uprisings are coming. They know that people are feeling that unrest. So let's meet them with violence. Let's meet them with that, militarized violence. It's worked for us overseas when we're through imperialism, oppressing other peoples and stealing their resources for the benefit of our wallets. So why not do it to the people here too? Mm-hmm. And I think that's the major miscalculation that they're making, because we're right here with them. When they do that abroad, ultimately they will get pushed out eventually, right? Like the people who live in those places, the indigenous peoples of those places will fight back. They will fight until the bitter end, because that is their homeland and they know their homeland, and they are not going to let these foreign invaders continue to occupy it, right? We've seen it a million times. And And here, you know, once they start doing that to us in excess, I think it's already started. You know, people are organizing against the cop cities. They're pushing back. People are organizing against the imperialism. I think we're seeing more momentum, but something else is that they're stepping up the repression. And I think there's going to be these phases where it works for a time and then it stops working. And I think what happened with the encampment movement is they came down with the hammer on a lot of people. And I think we had a lot of mass activists involved in that who weren't used to that, who had not had the hammer brought down on them before, and were almost shocked with like the excessive response and the violence that they faced. And I think it's a traumatic thing for people, you know. And I think a lot of people, it worked on them to where they got a bit of a chilling effect. Even though we got charges dropped, even though we fought back, even though we helped where we could, a lot of people felt that. And I think even on campus with like the time, place, and manner thing came down from the top, you know, and it's not just our campus, it's all over. And it was done to create a chilling effect there as well. They want to quell it with this like draconic policy that will stop people from acting out against them. And that's why my opinion is now more than ever, when they start doing this chilling effect, those of us that are willing to fight, we got to fight twice as hard. We got to be twice as loud. We got to push back. Because, you know, even a good example is in Tampa, our Tampa Bay SDS, some years back, we had a group of students known as the Tampa Five. They were just going into the admin building for a protest. Wasn't anything too crazy, but they were met with excessive police violence and they were given felony charges. What did they do? They fought back. They went public. They did a national speaking tour and got the whole country involved. And even in a place like Florida, where it's right, far right, up and down, and they had every intention of repressing them and hitting them with felonies, they won. Charges dropped, defeated them. So fighting back works. Don't let them scare you. You know, that's my advice always. When they strike us, we strike back twice as hard. And we have to keep pushing because like this system of oppression is not going anywhere. It's up to us, all of us, to push back against it. And I think as the struggle intensifies and as more and more people feel the impacts of it and see the repression firsthand and they can see it in the public eye, like you said, people are on their phones. If it's not on their phone, they might miss it. So we need to be loud. We need to be there so that they see it. Because I think like more often than not, people are not okay with that. And they do get that.
Yeah, totally. Rick, let me take a minute or two to go over the station identifier again because it's the top of the hour. From Playhouse Arts, this is KHHALP Arcata, 94.7 FM, community forward radio, broadcasting from the heart of the Creamery District in Arcata. And let me also go ahead and pay the bills. I'm going to give a shout out to and repeat these couple of underwriting copies here for the people that do pay the bills for Humboldt Hot Air. First one I'm going to give a shout out to is, we've talked about Occupy Cal Poly, and we can always piece back over if there's anything that comes up. I wanted to get into the work that SDS is doing currently, if there's more that you'd like to say about these this specific movement, and that's not anything specific about the meeting, but the work that you guys are doing leading up to and involving that meeting that's happening on the 15th of this month, you said, to divest. And then also this hour want to get into the Humboldt Anti-War Committee to let people know what's happening there. I think it's generating, I just got, my partner looks at, she's on social media. And so she's the one, I don't get bothered with reading comments and things like that myself, because I know that there is a lot of no, they're uneducated. There's a lot of uneducated people. There's a lot of what I call gnarly opposition around here, right? That are, pro-Trump, make America great again minded. They're status quo minded. They don't, they would prefer, again, like I was saying earlier, they want, Eureka City Council to just focus on Eureka, or Arcata City Council to just focus on Arcata. Yet these are some of the same people that have not ever been out to a single city council meeting, have not, actually done any work in the community to help the community, any boots on the ground. It's just literal keyboard jockey level, you know what I mean? And so I don't get too involved in the comments. That's, literally pointless for me, and so I don't do that. But my partner does, and she said these articles, like I said, whether it was the Times Standard article, the Lost Coast Outpost article, or the Redheaded Black Belt article, the specific posts on Facebook, because a lot of these, bad-minded keyboard jockeys are on Facebook, is where they, that's kind of the bit of like the whether you're boomers or not, that's the bit of the, you know what I mean? It's not the place for the young chic kids. It's not where the kids, the younger folks are. You know what I mean? But those people are on there and they are upset. They are saying a whole lot. Like I said, my partner's telling me all about this, and you know what I mean, like some of the latest stuff. And we'll get into it in a little bit later. But this work that had I for the Humboldt Anti-War Committee has just started in the recent months, and already kind of put ruffled some feathers out there, and that's what has to happen. Yeah. The system has to get shaken up. The status quo has to get addressed, and these institutions, whether they're City of Eureka or the campus, or any of these institutions, need to get rattled out of their complacency and their stupor to say, all right, what are we going to stand for? And so we'll get into that. Maybe that's towards the end of it. You know what I mean? But I want to again give a shout out to SDS, all the folks down there. Because you guys have done great work. And so would you be willing to talk about some of the work that has led up to since Occupy Cal Poly, the work that has been happening leading up to what's happening currently?
Yeah, definitely. And real quick, just a quick comment on what you said about those comments and all that before I get into it. I would say that the ideas that people like that are parroting come from powerful people. They come from the media that they own. They are meant to put reactionary ideas into people's minds that they then parrot back. I think that, there is a level of education that needs to happen. And I think that it's intentional. They want to turn regular working people against their own interests. But what I would say is when they use the language of the enemy against us, it means we've drawn a line between us and the enemy. When we're attacked with the language of the enemy, it means that we've done something right.
That's right.
And we got to keep ruffling those feathers. So I'd say, and we just started that. So I think it's a success. 100%. I'm glad to hear it. But anyway, to go into the SDS stuff. The big thing obviously right now, we've been pushing for a while. We've been trying to get this scholarship program for displaced students from Gaza adopted by the school, and we've run into some hurdles with that, but we're still pushing on it. And then now we're pushing on the investment declaration, and we're making momentum on that. What I would say is it's been a long struggle since then. We've been pushing against the university, and they try to push back wherever they can. It's not an easy win at any point, but I've realized that when we fight back more and when we put more pressure on and we start calling more protests and we start getting out in the media more, they start to do more. So we've been getting more and more aggressive with our approach because this is stuff that has to happen. It's long overdue. And I think that what just happened with me, where I was targeted, we moved that into a public campaign focusing really on the discrimination that comes to Palestine activism and calling them out on it and putting the pressure on. And we're building on that pressure now to force through our divestment campaign. And it comes, with a bit of an unsaid, almost, I don't want to say threat, but like a reality that if they put the hammer down on this, then we will act. And I mean, in our most recent statement where we talked about it on the Instagram, we said so. We were very open about that. If they shut this down, if they are not willing to adopt this or to work with us on this, then we will fight, because this is not okay. Our tuition money is going towards this. We're not going to do it anymore. We will do something about it. We will act. And if they don't want another encampment movement, then they should start acting. They should start listening, because all it takes is one campus to step up and take more drastic action. And next thing you know, it's spreads like wildfire.
That's right.
And it may be that that's what has to happen. And we can't be afraid to back down from that. Just like the original students who stepped up and did that weren't, we have to be just as brave. And that's something that I believe strongly in. And, you know, it's scary, right? You know, people don't want to risk their education or their jobs or whatever. But at the same time, if we fight, we will win. Like, we have to have faith in that. We have to have faith in the people. We have to have faith in our tactics. We can win. You know, they don't want the heat, and we got to bring the heat. So right now, you know, it seems like they're already starting to get on the back foot, because they were immediately like, yeah, we'll meet with you on this. How soon? They were like, let's get there right away. But we'll see what happens in the meeting. I don't want to speak too soon. And I think, like, what people see from our public statements following that meeting will show how it went. You know, we'll be very clear about it. And if things don't go the way we're hoping that they will, then I think come the start of spring, we're going to see some big action happening. So, you know, we'll see what they do. You know, right now, ball's in their court on that one. But we intend to make sure that this happens one way or another. And the other big thing that we've been focused on for a while now is the accessibility issues on our campus, because it's something that has not gotten enough attention. It has not gotten enough attention. We have a campus that is very inaccessible. You know, it's built on these massive hills. You've got these buildings that do have some accessibility within them, but then they're not connected accessibly to any other building. So you're trapped, right? Unless you take these shuttles that go on their own time, that are late all the time. People don't have their own independence to move when they need to, if they have certain disabilities. So that's another thing that's been big right now that we've been struggling against. And we were just at the University Senate calling them out in that and bringing it to the media. And we're working closely with people who've been fighting for that for years on campus, supporting them. And I think that's another thing where, like, if we don't start seeing more activity, then we might need to do more. You know, we might need to bring the people out in support of that and make some real changes. Because, you know, like, all of us, even if you don't have a disability now, you may have one later in life. You may have one at some point, whether it's temporary or permanent. Like, it's a very real thing, and all people deserve to be able to get where they need to go on their own. Like, they deserve that right. Like, they should have that right. They should not be limited because the people in power didn't care enough to install a ramp or whatever.
Right.
So that's another big one. So we've been going at that, and because we put the pressure on, they actually have started doing some stuff. Like I just heard from one of our good friends in the committee. You know, he's in a wheelchair and he's been struggling for a long time, and he's been telling us they fixed this, they fixed that. I can get into this building now. And it's, you know, on the one hand, like, it feels real good to hear that, and it makes me happy to know that his life is a little bit easier, because he does not deserve the kind of struggle that he faces on the day to day. He's had to jump through hoops. He's had to spend hours to get to some of his classes, and it's wrong. So it's been good to hear that. But at the same time, there is so much more that they aren't doing, that isn't being planned, that needs to happen. So we're pushing on that, and we've seen some mild success. We've seen them start acting, but we got to push for more. And they don't want to call these things ADA violations. They try to dance around it. So my statement in the University Senate was, these are ADA violations. I want everyone to know, let's be very clear, you are breaking the law and we need to fix it, right? Like, let's be very clear about this, because this is illegal and you're harming people. And if you want to act like you're progressive and like you care about people, then you can't be doing that. You also can't be funding Israel or the U.S. military-industrial complex.
Right.
There's all these contradictions. And, you know, I mean, something that's really crazy to me is our campus in particular. The administration building is named Siemens Hall after President Siemens. And President Siemens, during the Vietnam protesting, actually stood with the students and said, I'm with them. You know, we're going to completely support them. We're going to completely support this protesting. We are not going to shut anything down. And that is the legacy of our campus. That is the name of the building these administrators reside in. Right. That is the name of the building that our students had to occupy to get any results. So what's going on? You know, like, they better start living up to what our campus is all about, or they got to go.
Yeah. It's so sad to see that, as these decades have passed, they have lost the meaning of, the founders of the school and what they had, in mind, and they've strayed from that, and that can't be because the university in a more left-leaning area, the university is going to be a bit of like the front line. And so these are the people that have really got to be holding that line on an entire level, and of not just the faculty, but again, like you're saying, like the administration, the people that work there have got to keep those ideals in mind when they do whatever they're doing on campus, and it's interesting, I'm glad that you were bringing up that, because that was my first thought. It's like these should be ADA violations, and they're trying to skirt the law there. But if they can literally use disaster relief funds to break up students expressing their First Amendment rights, right to assemble and right to free speech, if they can use disaster relief funds for that, then they can find some funds to make sure that these ADA violations are addressed.
100%. And I just saw, too, that the CSU Board of Trustees just dumped a ton of money into AI.
Oh, no.
They got money for AI, but they don't got money for ADA violations. It's just... It's a whole thing. The CSU Board of Trustees, they run it like a corporation. They run it like a hedge fund. They're all about the money. They don't care. So that's a whole greater battle, I think, and it even goes up to the governor because the governor appoints them. So it's a huge corrupt system. And Students for a Democratic Society, we're called that not because we're Democrats, right, but because we actually believe in a democratic society. And when you've got this system in our schools where the governor decides who sits on the CSU board, who decides who sits as the president, and all these people at the top get this big money to keep things the way that they are, and the students and the faculty and the staff are left voiceless, even with the biggest unions largely toothless, then we don't have any other means for democracy. We don't have any other means to push back than protest, then fighting back. I would say that the most democratic act that we can do in an undemocratic society is to fight back. It comes from activism. It comes from struggle. That is the will of the people manifesting in an undemocratic situation. You got to push back. And we see it on the campus, and it's just something we got to fight against. Because, for me, if we're going to have a democratic society, I'm going to have democracy on my campus. I'm going to have democracy in my workplace. I'm going to have democracy in all levels of society. You're not going to put some representative in charge of me that I can't vote out on a dime. That's not going to happen. I'm going to decide who that is. I'm going to decide what they're doing. The majority, not just me personally, but the majority, you know what I'm saying? As a voice of the people, we're going to decide that. But that's not what's happening, right?
It's crazy that it's literally like an just a different space of oligarchy. It's like an educational oligarchy here in our state of California. And these universities. I mean, and the UC system is very similar in how it operates. And so between the Cal State schools and the UC system, that is. It could be millions. I know it's at least hundreds of thousands between both the sets of systems. That's hundreds of thousands of students in this state that are literally, they just keep on raising tuition. They keep on making it, less and less financially feasible for people in this state to be able to get these educations, raising the price of books and tuition and things. And the material conditions of things are not getting better for students, even down to our most vulnerable disabled people not getting their voices heard and their material conditions changed. Because that's literally one of the first things that should be, there should be, that's federal. ADA is federal.
The fact that people with disabilities on campus have been saying it, have been trying, have been fighting, to the point where there's been, I think, 2 lawsuits now against the school, successful lawsuits, because they have just not been listening. I think that speaks to a very deep systemic problem. And it's something interesting to take note of is the minute the SDS got involved and started pressuring them, and there was a bit of teeth there, they started to suddenly do a little more. And I think that it speaks to every aspect of oppression within this society. I think that people want to just be able to like have a kind conversation and ask for something and work it out. And a lot of these people in power, they're very good at putting on a front, pretending they care, acting friendly, acting nice, giving you the listening ear. But when it comes to action, their hands are always tied. But the second that you bring the teeth in, the claws in, and you bring some pressure, all of a sudden their hands aren't so tied anymore. So if there's one message I can get out to people, always it's organize and fight back. Don't be complacent. Don't let them tell you what they can and can't do. Make sure that you keep pushing, because there is always a way, and all it takes is the pressure. And you know what? Most people are willing to fight for these things. Most people support these things. You're going to have your people with reactionary or backward ideas. Of course, we live in a society where they literally spend billions of dollars on media to give people those ideas. Literally. Yep. So it's going to happen, but it's okay, because your average people do understand. They can get that, and they will fight for that. So we got to have that faith in each other. The second that we start becoming afraid of the people, or thinking that the people don't have our backs in these struggles against oppression, that is the second that we lose our power. We have to have faith in each other. That's all we got in the end, And every single movement that has won anything, that has gotten close to major change, it happened because they had faith in each other. They built these strong coalitions. They built this strong organization so that they could fight back together.
Mm-hmm. Right. I love hearing more about SDS, because SDS reminds me of what, the proletariat, or just when the people come together and, move towards a certain set of ideas and a certain set of goals. And that's what, I talk about this with friends, but like the unions. So you talked about something that was super meaningful earlier when you said, the money that was raised by the bail funds, and then ARC came in too to help with that. And then there was money that was left over at the end that went to Palestine, that went to help people in Palestine, and to help people in their specific material conditions after being arrested. That is something that a lot of people don't know, is that the unions are sitting on millions and millions and millions of dollars in strike funds that is supposed to go towards when the union has to go on strike, and then that ends up affecting people. People get fired or have financial repercussions, or arrested, and those type of repercussions. Like those strike funds, like people pay membership dues to unions, and then these unions, Teamsters, are sitting on hundreds of millions of dollars literally right now. The SEIU is going to be sitting on millions of dollars. You know what I mean? These unions are sitting on millions of dollars in strike funds, and the unions have been corrupted at the top. Yeah. To where those people are not listening to their members or addressing the issues that their members are saying need to be addressed. And so it's like saying that same kind of oligarchy-minded thing. Some of these, top union guys are standing behind, for instance, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, when they're, up doing what they've done, in the last, in the limelight in the last in the last few years. You know what I mean? Like these union leaders are like entrenched in the system, and they're not helping us. And so that's one of the things, is that people, with that being said, there's that should be one of the main modicums, one of the main methods of change. And they've been kind of, castrated in a sense because of having bad leadership that's, buying into the system and working and operating for the system. And so SDS is like a really strong union that's operating properly. And that's what people can look at that model as and say, and think this is what the unions actually should be like. Now, I'm not painting all unions that way. There's going to be unions on a local level and even larger, level that are operating well, you know what I mean, and listening to their constituents and doing things right. But there's no big unions that are, like we saw Italy. Their unions basically said in the last few, it was just a few months ago now, but their unions came together and said, all right, we're going to have a strike. And it's operated from the unions. It was the union saying everybody, teachers, nurses, all kinds of unions in Italy. They said, all right, we're going to have the strike. And that's where it's supposed to come down from, is the unions are, a committee of people. And that's the work. That's where it should be coming from. And so it doesn't happen like that in this country, again, because, they're corrupt at the top level. But people should just, like I said, use SDS as that example of this is how my union should be working. Yeah. There should be boots on the ground. There should be people fighting. Like I've heard, on a separate note, I've heard a lot of workers over the years complain about Providence, the Providence Health System, St. Joe's, and a lot of those, these health corporations. And it's like, don't forget, like this is what your union, if you're a union member and you're paying dues, don't just sit there and pay dues and them not do anything for you. Don't pay dues and them get you have the negotiator that's going to the table, even at the local county level, you know what I mean? And negotiate, they're going to give you, okay, we're going to get like this little bit of this. Like they're giving the people the scraps. And so it's like we've got to push the unions. We've got to fill up our unions more and push these unions to actually get boots on the ground for Palestine, to stop these corporations, to stop the military-industrial complex from, having money in all pockets of the country. If where you live here in Eureka, you're saying, oh, just worry about Eureka items. Well, some of this money in Eureka's funds is being invested in military-industrial complex. Yep. And so that should not happen. And if we on a local level, that's why the local matters, so much on a local level. If we organize and fight back against that, we can make changes with that. We can get these jurisdictions to divest. And so that is a big part of the work. That is something that, the anti-war committee is, moving towards, is getting local city governments to divest these funds, because there's a lot of government workers around here. The county, Humboldt County, is the largest employer in the county. I think I may be wrong about this, but I just hear certain things from people that I know that work from the county. And I used to work at Coast Central years ago, and so the county payroll goes through Coast Central. And so I remember hearing these numbers of there's 6,000 to 8,000, and maybe way more than that, but there's thousands of county workers. And so then there's a lot of county money. There's a lot of CalPERS money. CalPERS is one of the biggest funds. And, people forget these things sometimes. California is one of the largest economies in the world. Yep. So if there's a fund like CalPERS where so many, hundreds of thousands of government workers on a local and state level are having their 401ks in CalPERS, there's going to be tens of billions of dollars, because CalPERS is huge. It's a lot of money. So there's going to be tens of billions invested in the Lockheed Martins, the BAE systems, the Rafael systems. You know what I mean? These really bad military industrial. Essentially all really bad, because they're all supporting imperialism. But our money, so much of our local money, so much of our local people have their money, their retirement. Those dollars are in supporting these military industrial corporations. And so it's never just, let's just have Eureka focus on Eureka. No. It's never just that. It's all goes, this is all a part of so many of the financialized situations in capitalism. Your money is not just local, and so, we've got to get people, continue to work to get people educated and, boots on the ground to not let these types of situations continue. And so that's why I'm really stoked on what's happening. And it's not even just the Humboldt Anti-War Committee. I've seen there's pockets of activists, and I could sit here and name off a laundry list. Shout out to the Green Party of Humboldt County. Shout out to the North Coast Progressive Alliance. Shout out to Veterans for Peace. Shout out to Old Town Community
Alliance.
The Community Alliance. Yeah. People that are on the ground getting work done in this local community. You know what I mean? They're out there. And so there's groups out there for people to get involved with. It's one of the only good things. It's not necessarily, I'm not saying there's anything good about wolf in sheep's clothing like Donald Trump, fox in the hen house level, just pure oligarch-minded capitalists, the worst of the worst being out there. But one of the only good things that comes from somebody so bad being up there is that people see, because their mask is off, and so they're like, okay, so there's organization that happens more when you got somebody so bad. It's one of the bad things, unfortunate things about when we get a Democrat as the president. A lot of people go to sleep. Obama literally, for lack of a better term, he killed the anti-war movement because so many people went to sleep. I was so worried, that I was just thinking in my head, if Kamala gets to be president, a lot of people are going to stay asleep. They're not going to organize and fight back against the system that would continue to steamroll and hurt so many people in our country and abroad. And so, shout out to the people, like I said, those groups locally that are, boots on the ground, making things happen to educate people. The Humboldt Solidarity coalitions out there doing work, I don't know if they're newer or not, but shout out to those folks. That's one of the things is that we've seen, these pretty. I'm a straight talker when I talk about these kind of stuff, the kind of things, right? Like the No Kings protests have really just been these performative, kind of just events for people to go out and a lot of people to come and get involved and feel like they were there. They were when Trump was in office. I was there. I'm literally kind of quoting Kwame Ture because he's talked about in his speech talking about organization versus mobilization. He was talking about, he's like, yeah, I got my brothers and sisters, that were, he's like, talking about, just an example of I know this sister, she was talking about, I was there at the Million Man March. If there's a million brothers that are all going to be in one place at the same time, I'm going to be there. I was there. And he's like, okay, well, what have you done since? What have the people that came out to shout out to the, probably definitely a few thousand people each time that have come out to the No Kings protests locally. How many of those people have gone to a single meeting, spent a single hour in the last few months, organizing or just being around activists to see what's going on? Because once we can get that education, that political consciousness out there to people to do more than just the No Kings thing and actually be involved in organizations, then they're going to start to really get scared. They're going to start to really, back, like you talk about, being on the back pedal when people really start to organize and say, we're going to, you got this organization dealing with this issue, Shout out to the people, some of my friends down at the AHHA, the folks that help the homeless people around here, you know what I mean? All that work is super crucial. We're fighting against this mentality of people that, they have even forgotten the human rights, the humanity of people, I see it. I've seen it. I've seen kids, young kids, 10, 11, 12 years old, walk by homeless people and kick them and stuff like that. And it's that's the mentality of these people. And in their families and in their households, they're preaching those type of mindsets to people. And that's what we're fighting against. That's what we're trying to educate people against is, Like, you can be in a horrible situation, homeless, addicted to drugs. That's still a human being.
Yeah.
Like, they deserve respect. They deserve the same fairness and equal treatment that you would want for your kids.
Yeah.
And they just need more help. The ecosystem for homeless people, for people that are on drugs, that are trying to get off of drugs or want to get off of drugs, the ecosystem is not there. This nonprofit, thing across the country, the nonprofit thing is pretty darn scammy, like a lot of that money. And I'm not talking about anybody in specific, any groups in specific. It's just the general nonprofit system is just another method for people capitalist minded in this capitalist society to try to drain things and operate how they want to rather than focusing on helping actual people around here, and so that mentality is what we're fighting against, trying to educate people. So again, shout out to all the groups in Humboldt County working against that, working for the positive progress of the people to get the people's conditions changed around here. Because all we've seen law enforcement do is over the years, I've been here for 22 years and I've just seen basically they kick the can down the road. They just keep displacing people around. There were a lot of people that were living in the Palco Marsh years ago, and then there was the big push to kick them all out of there. Okay, but then you've only created so many different low-income housing places and places for people to have housing. There's got to be more to help people that are in need. There's got to be that ecosystem. Otherwise, these problems that these conservatives and Republicans and status quo people keep on talking about, people in bad conditions, it's only going to get worse.
Yeah.
Capitalism, and especially now, the way so much more money is getting funneled upwards, and AI is set to unfortunately take a lot of jobs over. It's going to change. I hate to even quote Sam Altman, this AI technocrat. I wish I could cuss, what I mean? But this real, horrible person, right? He's the founder and CEO of OpenAI and everything, ChatGPT, right? Like, he's talked about, like the social contract is going to change. It's changing right now. And so, like, what are they going to do? Capitalism is just going to create an entire generation, an entire huge population of people without jobs. And what are they going to do? You know what I mean? Like, what are people going to do? Are they just going to let, homelessness increase? Is that what the system is going to do? I don't see them responding in a proper way.
No, you've touched on a lot of important stuff here, but to jump on that specifically, again, I am a socialist. I'm a member of the Freedom Road Socialist Organization as well, and we have a term for it. We call it the Reserve Army of the Unemployed, and it's a Marxist term. And what it means is that under capitalism, they actually want to have a bunch of unemployed people. They want to have a bunch of homeless people, and it serves multiple purposes. For the capitalists, the one thing is that if you have a big pool of people who are desperate for work, who are desperate for food, who are desperate for housing, you can get them to take the worst jobs for minimum wage or less. You can exploit them heavily. And on the other hand, having that pool of people scares your other workers who aren't making very much money. Oh, do you want to end up like them over there? It's a threat. And it's also used to prop up capitalism and their propaganda, where they say, look, there's just all these people who don't want to work or who don't want to do this or that. They hit it from multiple tiers. But really, the only people it benefits are these very wealthy and powerful people. And we would say they won't do anything about it, because there's never been a time under capitalism where they have fixed that problem. There has always been enough wealth under capitalism to resolve that, but they won't do it because it's not in the interest of the capitalists to resolve. And when you talk about like AI and new technologies, taking jobs, that's part of it too. As technology advances, the capitalists will look for the cheapest possible way to profit and to run their business. They don't care about the quality of a product after a certain point. They care about how much money that they can make, how much labor that they can cut. And that's at the heart of the class war, the contradictions between the working people who need to make a living from selling their labor to the capitalist, and the capitalist who wants to get that labor for as cheap as possible and cut corners using technology wherever they can. And we would actually, speaking, I'm going into a whole other thing, I guess, but speaking as a member, as a cadre of the Freedom Road Socialist Organization, we would actually, say that that this is like a deeper systemic issue within capitalism itself, and that it's at the heart of the struggle. That these contradictions between the working class and the capitalist class actually create conditions for socialism. So let me break it down. Like, under capitalism, we make more food than we know what to do with, right? Like, these corporations make so much food that they're throwing it away. They're not giving it to people who need it because they need them to stay hungry. They need them to stay poor. They're throwing it away. But we make enough food to feed everybody, right? Like, we have enough money to house everybody. We have the actual conditions to give everybody what they need. Like, that exists under capitalism. It's just that you have a minority of people that are holding all of that wealth. And that's the key contradiction. That's why we say that the conditions for socialism exist within capitalism. And that's why we say that the revolution towards socialism is an inevitable thing, because the workers are going to become aware of these contradictions through the exploitation that they face, because it's going to continue getting worse, right? And we're going to see that we could have it better, but we're not getting it because of the small amount of people, and that creates that war between us. And that's why we view that as like the driving force of societal change at this phase of history. And it all plays into that. And we see it on the local level here. We see it all around the country, but they won't fix the problems that benefit them. And that's why we got to fight and we got to organize. And I think you bring up an important point about mobilization versus organization. I'm not here to throw any dirt on anyone who, and I know you aren't either, who wants to come out and do something, obviously. But I think it is so important that we continue to do it, because if we just come out to one protest to feel good, that does not change the core systemic issues. We have to be consistent. We have to get organized. And going back to what you were saying about the unions, the reason why unions are so toothless now is because they were so, for lack of a better word, toothed. They had such sharp teeth before. They were militant forces that were highly organized. They were a threat to capital. They were a threat. And that is what made them so impactful and why they gained so much. So the second that those reforms went through and that unions became less powerful and that people were quelled, they started to systematically target union leadership, get them in bed with management, bribe them, change the structures from within. When less workers were as heavily involved and as radical, it was much easier to alter the structure of the unions and to take the power away from the workers and give it to these people who are in bed with the managerial class, these managers, these capitalists. So I think that the unions are a really important tool, as are the mass organizations, as are the student organizations. But what's crucial is that we are active within them and that we are struggling for leadership and direction. If we're in a union, we should be helping to organize that union towards more radical gains. If our union leadership isn't listening, we should organize against the union leadership. We should challenge them. And that's something that I believe in strongly. And I know my organization believes in strongly, something we fight for all over the country. We're in unions fighting. We're in the mass organizations fighting. We're in the student movement fighting, because that work is crucial to changing the way that things are. And I guess now I'll segue into the anti-war committee, because I think we're getting shorter on time, and I know you wanted to talk about it a bit. But I think that the anti-war committee is a really important way that we can bring, opposition to these greater imperialist ventures of the United States here at the local level. Because like you said, the money isn't just staying in Eureka, right? Like, when we pay federal taxes, the federal government is using that money to start wars. That's our business. That's our business in Eureka. That's our business wherever. Like, that is our money that's going to kill allow people that are just like us to steal from them, to benefit the same people who are exploiting us at home. It is the same people. The imperialists are also the monopoly capitalists here. And we need to recognize that we have more in common with the people in Palestine, with the people in Venezuela, with the people all over than we do with the people who are oppressing us all. And I think like that's what the Anti-War Committee is all about. And we're also part of the larger national network of AWAN, the Anti-War Action Network, which is a network of other anti-war organizations all over the country that are doing the same thing, because they also recognize that we have to stand with other people abroad when our money is being used to oppress them, that we are in a unified struggle against a common enemy who's exploiting all of us. And like I see those comments too where people say like, what does this have to do with what's happening here? It has everything to do with what's happening here. When the people who are oppressing them with your money are also oppressing you and taking your money, we have so much in common. It's a shared struggle, and we have to do something about it. And, you know, even people may say like, oh, well, getting a resolution passed or whatever, oh, that's a performative thing. Well, I would say that by getting a city council to declare against war on the local level and continuing that trend and building it up to state levels, I would say that goes beyond performative. If we get them to denounce the war and say that we're actually not going to provide any money towards that, that's a big move. And it's something that we need to build up to, right? I think we start with small steps like this, but we grow. And like you said, with divestment too, if we can get a resolution passed, denouncing it, it's that much easier to then say, well, since you denounced it, why don't you divest from this? Because this is tied to it.
Right, exactly. Take that to the next step, the next logical step, and not actually be performative with, you know, your actions on the governmental side. Actually take the dollars out. Do that, you know, and do that next, you know, that next part of it. No, it's so important, and I'm so glad that there is, you know, AWAN out there and an anti-war movement that is growing. You know, because like I said, you know, Obama basically decimated the anti-war movement, and here we are. I mean, it's just pretty. I mean, I don't even know if I have a word for it. It's just wild. You know, I started going to college. I went to Cal Poly Pomona before I came up here to Humboldt State. And my first year, freshman year, one of the first classes I took, we were talking about, at that time, George Bush was marching into Iraq. And it's just so wild for it to be happening again, this war, what would basically be a forever war for oil. It would be a forever war because ExxonMobil wants to stay there and continue to get, you know, oil. It's so interesting how people aren't educated about certain things that have happened, even with specifically Venezuela. You know, Chavez kicked ExxonMobil out, and they have been trying to get back in and get their claws back into one of the largest oil reserves, you know, countries in the world since. And it's like Trump is, you know, because that's his MO, is he's working for these people. He's just a puppet to the corporations, just letting, you know, he's fox in the henhouse level, you know, just letting them run amok. And, you know, here we are, and it's just like it's just been wild the last few months. I'm just like, nobody's like doing anything about it. We're about to go into one of these again, just literally go in there to take their resources. And just like it was in Iraq, just like with Afghanistan, you know, like who was, you know, growing a lot of poppies and bringing a lot of heroin over, you know, from Afghanistan. That was the United States. That was the imperialists. You know what I mean? And so here we are 20 plus years since then, and it's the same thing happening again, and it's just wow to me. And what's something that's interesting for me, and we got about 5 minutes, so I'm stoked, you know, because for us to, you know, continue to talk about this all the way through to the end. But what's something interesting for me, you know, these people, these pro-Trump people that are for, you know, us taking Venezuela and everything like that. It's so interesting that he is this guy that always, Trump is this, you know, jerk that always talks about, oh, fake news, fake news, fake news. And so you would think that his people wouldn't just lap up imperialist propaganda from these huge media outlets that are in the pocket of the billionaires. Yet I've seen these people talk about in some of these comments, like I said, my partner's reading through some of these comments online and everything like that. And I just rudimentally read through a few of them when some of these articles first dropped. And it's like some of the things are said that are being said is like, oh, if these people only knew, talking about the activists, us that went up there to the Eureka City Council, if these people only knew that Hezbollah and, some of these quote unquote terrorist organizations, Hezbollah is only fighting for the sovereignty of their country against an imperialist colonial power, but they're like, if they only knew how these bad actors are literally doing work in Venezuela, like that's literally a Wall Street Journal talking point. There was a Wall Street Journal article that just basically said that, and then that's the media coming out with that. They're lapping up this quote unquote what they would call fake news. They're lapping it up, because if that's what they don't stand for anything. It's just all about what fits their worldview and supports their worldview the most, and so there's no, it's pretty insane to watch it all just going down. And I'm just glad that on a local level, us, and across the country with A1 and any other group that is putting boots on the ground to say, hey, like, no local jurisdictions, no local municipal governments should be vested in any of this, and have to at least say, okay, so I'm looking at what happened when we went up there to the city council, and the mayor of Eureka talked about the human rights resolution that had been passed years ago. Okay, so if that's the case, then when issues arise related to these human rights that we're supposed to be trying to protect for people across the globe, then you have to say something about it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it can't just be this same old blanket, okay, we already passed this, let's push this back out there. It's got to be, we're going to speak up, say something, help support this resolution to affirm the sovereignty of Venezuela. You know what I mean? Like, that's what's got to happen. And that should be happening across the country.
Yeah. I agree 100%. And I think, the fact that we have so many reactionary comments to this, for this one little thing we did, this one little resolution on the agenda, lots of eyes are on it. It shows that we are ruffling feathers. We are getting the message out there. And so we need to use that momentum and continue to do so, and continue to educate and continue to challenge, because that's what's so important. And, I think it's interesting you bring up like that we're kind of just repeating what's happened before, because when we think about Iraq and Saddam Hussein and all of that, you can think whatever you want about the leaders of other countries, whatever, but at the end of the day, a fact is that he nationalized the oil industry there, and then we came in and we took the oil there, right? And like, guess what? They nationalized the oil in Venezuela, and what are we doing? We're trying to get that for Exxon, and it's a repetitive thing, and they make up stories, and there could be real unrest in some places in the world with some of these leaders, but at the end of the day, anytime the United States is getting involved, it is never because of any real unrest. It's because they want something from that area. The capitalists want something that's going to make them rich. And that's what we have to remember, is that, like, even if you're like, oh, well, I'm not 100% on board with this government over here. Okay, well, you don't live there. You live here in the United States, and your government is trying to ransack their country, kill their civilians, and take their resources. So we better do something about it, because that's our government that's doing it. Do they really represent us when they're doing these things? Is this what we want them to do? I would say most people would say no. I mean, you've got your people who are propagandized to believe these things, but that can only last so long for most people as well before they start to wake up. And I think that they're still in the minority by and large. I think most people are against it. I looked at a poll, and I think I even recited it at the city council, and it showed that even conservatives were largely against a war to take Nicolas Maduro from power. Even conservatives. So, you've got the loudest people on the internet, you always do. But at the end of the day, most conservatives even don't want it. They don't want another war either. Trump ran on that anti-war thing, obviously falsely, but they voted for him on that platform. So, he's good at tricking them. He's good at deceiving them. They're not quite there with education. But at the end of the day, people don't want war, by and large. And I think we gotta keep bringing the heat on that.
Yep, I completely agree. Hey, Rick, I appreciate your time so much for this episode, for this airing here. Let me give you another 20 seconds to give any shout outs that you want to anybody you want to, and then we'll wrap this episode up.
All right. Shoot, I wasn't prepared to give any shout outs, but let me think about that. I give a shout out to the Anti-War Action Network, by and large, every single organization that's a part of that's doing work where they're at. I know we have so many within it that I could not possibly name them all, but thank you all for the work that you do, to SDS National, of course, to the Freedom Road Socialist Organization. I would even say, to the Students for Justice in Palestine, Palestinian Youth Movement, to Palestine Legal, who just recently was willing to represent me if the university tried to crack down on me any further. I could name organizations all day. Humboldt for Palestine, I know they're not around right now, but for everything that they've done in our community, I think that they were one of the major players that really helped not only bring movement on fighting for Palestine, but bringing the culture of Palestinians here. I thank them for that. And, I can name more organizations, but what I'll say is any group, any org, anybody who is involved